tonight on Nation to Nation.
I'm going to be the premier of all Quebecers.
The CAQ is back. What do the next 4 years look like for Indigenous people in Quebec?
Justice for Joyce! Justice for Joyce! Justice for Joyce!
Joyce Echaquan's family takes their healthcare concerns to court.
The health authority knew about this and did not do anything for 2 years.
And a Cree community in northern Quebec searches an island for unmarked graves. Good evening. I'm Lindsay Richardson, guest host of the season premiere of Nation to Nation. You normally find me covering APTN's Quebec beat, and that's what we're focusing on tonight, La Belle Province post-election. On Monday, François Legault and his coalition Avenir Quebec swept to victory in the provincial election, winning more than 70% of the seats in the National Assembly. With the win comes an unexpected first. Catherine Champagne-Jourdain, Innu from Washat-Makmaniutnam, becomes the first Indigenous woman to win a seat in Quebec's National Assembly. So to glean some context and reaction as to what this all means, we're joined by Mandy Galmasti, Grand Chief of the Cree Nation government. So to start, a bit of a personal question here. You were the first woman elected Grand Chief of the Cree Nation back in 2021, and now with this election, we have the first Indigenous woman joining the Quebec's National Assembly. I guess I want to know, what's your reaction to that news?
I'm really pleased to hear of an Indigenous woman being elected to the National Assembly. I'd like to congratulate Madame Champagne-Jourdain on her success, and to the Innu Nation as well for having a representative, of their nation. I'm proud to see that there are women coming up, and I think that earlier last year, many doors opened with the election of so many women.
Definitely. Now, Catherine Champagne-Jourdain was elected as part of the majority party, so her situation's a little bit exceptional, but I'm curious, are there some challenges to account for when you are an Indigenous woman embarking on a political career?
I think that this will be a very unique experience for her. Being the first female woman, there's a lot of challenges that I think she will encounter, but with a strong team, with support, with the right staff around her, I really believe that she will succeed. Indigenous women are resilient, so I foresee strength in her future.
Now, the CAQ is touting her appointment as a sign of progress for the government. He also mentioned in his victory speech that he hopes to continue on the road of reconciliation in the next 4 years. But I'm curious, based on what you've observed during his first term, are we even really on the way?
I think our relationship with Premier Legault last term was one that had, some lumps and bumps. He is learning. It is his first time, I think, really working with Indigenous peoples, but there is more that can be done. Of course, learning, you have a period of time, but after that, you really have to get into it. So I'm hoping to see this term a deeper understanding, more connection, and, you say the word reconciliation, more has to come along with that. So I'm challenging Mr. Legault to really establish a committee of Indigenous advisors that can show him the way on this path of reconciliation, and that he takes their lead on how to approach this issue.
Mm-hmm. Now, we know that hoping to reconcile, it involves a lot of moving pieces. So I'm curious, one holdout from the Quebec government is the admission that systemic racism exists. It has existed and continues to impact Indigenous ways of life. How crucial do you think that acknowledgement is if Quebec hopes to reconcile moving forward?
For me, reconciliation really means learning and understanding, what the other party has gone through. And I think this is where Premier Legault and his team need to do the legwork of connecting with Indigenous people, learning what their experiences are. From there, I believe that this will really open the door to understanding what racism means. It is very clear and apparent. I myself have also experienced racism here in Quebec. It is there. I've been treated differently in hospitals, in various settings. The moment I speak French, it's very different. And I have a lot of concerns with what's coming forward. So Mr. Legault and his team have a lot of work to do to make sure that they address this issue.
And up until this point, obviously, pandemic aside, the CAQ's prioritized economy and development. This is something that came out of the campaign speeches. François Legault's hinting at more open pit mining and construction of hydro dams, which I think it's fair to say has blindsided a large segment of the Indigenous population. I want to know, again, what are the specific concerns for Iwishi with regards to economic development?
For us, we are a territory that is already heavily impacted by mining, by forestry, by hydroelectric development. And my nation is really in a place right now where they're reflecting and asking themselves, okay, what are these impacts having on our culture, on our traditional activities? How have we changed as a people? When we heard these comments during the campaign, it was very concerning. Yes, we were blindsided. Nobody was aware. But moving forward, I think if Mr. Legault wants to have partnership with Indigenous peoples and speak about development, you really need to establish that relationship. You have to, have that connection. You have to have that dialogue, and you have to he has to be prepared to understand that there is a type of development that Indigenous peoples may accept, and there's also a range that they will not accept. And it's about going back and forth and having that dialogue and creating a partnership moving forward.
Now, one other thing that came out of that victory speech, Legault is stressing that First Nations, Inuit, and the overall Quebec population need each other to move forward. But we also know there are so many communities that are fighting for self-determination. I'm just curious, do you think that's true? Do we really need each other to move forward?
I think as a province, there is definitely a relationship there between the groups. But I also think that because of the differences in culture and location and identity and history, there's a lot of work on the Quebecois part to catch up and really understand what that means. So if Mr. Legault feels that we need one another, that relationship goes back and forth. He needs to understand what the issues are of Indigenous communities, the reality of Inuit communities, and he really needs to ensure that he is inclusive in his framework while also respecting the difference between Indigenous groups and the Quebecois people.
Thank you, Grand Chief, for your time. Ghislain Picard, Regional Chief for the Assembly of First Nations Quebec Labradors, also pushed for more commitment from the Legault government. Here's what he hopes to see coming out of their next term.
So next steps would be, okay, how is the Legault government going to approach the Indigenous issues as a whole? And to me, I was just reading this piece this morning, and it really reflects what's been on my mind for the past 2-3 years. And it's the fact that this government has not had a vision when it comes to Indigenous issues. That's going to be the biggest challenge for for the next 4 years. Reconciliation is the buzzword for just about everyone, including the Premier of Quebec. What is important is, what's behind it. What are the actions that are being proposed? How do we engage with Indigenous peoples in this province?
Time for a quick break, but when we come back, how much is a human life worth? Stay tuned. Welcome back. It's been 2 years since Joyce Echaquan live-streamed racist taunts by caregivers at Joliette Hospital in her dying moments. A Quebec coroner concluded Joyce would likely still be alive today if she were white. So the Echaquan family just filed a $2.7 million lawsuit targeting Joliette Hospital, the Regional Health Authority, and the workers involved in Joyce's care. Their lawyer, Patrick Martin-Ménard, joins us now from Montreal. Now, first question here, it's obviously difficult to quantify how much a human life is worth. So how did you determine the amount claimed in this lawsuit?
Well, there are clear guidelines that are set by tribunals as to what can be claimed with what we call non-pecuniary damages for pain and suffering. So using the existing case law and using the specific facts of this case, we set the amount of the claim for each of the plaintiffs in this case. So Joyce's husband, Carol, their 7 children, as well as Joyce's parents and other family members.
Now, that aside, the statement of claim is quite a lengthy document. What are some of the key arguments made?
So what is important to know is that we're claiming both compensatory damage to compensate for the death of Joyce, as well as punitive damages. It's very rare that punitive damages can be claimed in Quebec civil law. Here we are claiming it because we believe that there was an illicit and intentional violation of Joyce's rights throughout her hospitalization at the Joliette Hospital. It is clear that the health authority knew that there was a very serious systemic racism problem at the Joliette Hospital. There had been a public commission 2 years before that had heard very clear evidence of people who lived things that were very similar to what Joyce experienced on September 28, 2020. People who were systematically refused care, sent back home because no one was listening to their actual health complaints, and they were being labeled as either drug addicts or people who were dependent on pain medication, and they were just sent back without any thorough investigation. And that's exactly what happened to Joyce. So the health authority knew about this and did not do anything for 2 years until the tragic events of September 28, 2020 happened. And there is nothing that excuses this inaction. So this is why we're claiming punitive damages. And more broadly, there's been a series of faults throughout Joyce's hospitalization specifically that led to her death. Essentially, she was labeled as someone who was addicted to narcotics very early on in her hospitalization. And as a result, when she complained about extreme pain, no one really listened to her and no one took it seriously, when in fact at that time there was a serious cardiac episode that was under installation. And the fact that it was not investigated, that it was not treated, that she was placed essentially in isolation in a room where she was tied up with her both of her hands, both of her legs and her torso, left there without any surveillance, that's when unfortunately she passed away as a result of serious negligence on the part of doctors and staff involved.
Now, it's obviously taken a while to get to this point, the filing of the statement of claim. From a legal standpoint, is this a case that's kind of unprecedented, or did you have things to work off of?
I'd say the punitive aspect, the punitive damages claim is something quite novel in this specific situation. Because it involves a systemic racism aspect that is not present in a typical medical malpractice case. Other than that, of course, I mean, both in terms of the number of plaintiffs, the complexity of the case, the amount of public coverage that this case got, and the profound impact that it had on the Quebec healthcare system. It's certainly an unprecedented case.
Well, given the supporting evidence, are you and the family feeling optimistic about getting results?
Obviously, I think we have a very strong case. We have very good arguments to make both for the compensatory damages and for the punitive damages. Then it remains to be seen what kind of a position will be taken by the hospital and by the other defendants. But we are hoping for a swift resolution of the case.
Now, a technical question, again, this is something that comes up in civil cases. In the event of a court victory, what happens if the workers named in the suit can't pay the damages that are requested?
Okay, well, it always depends on, I mean, there's a question of insurance coverage, right, essentially. So the doctors are covered by the Canadian Medical Protection Association. Normally, the healthcare workers are also covered by the insurer of the hospital. Now here there's an aspect of punitive damages that is claimed to personally to the nurse who is heard in this absolutely horrific video uttering these racist insults towards Ms. Echaquan as she was in tremendous pain. So for this specific claim, I don't know how it will work for the insurance coverage, whether it covers or not. If the insurance does not cover, then she will be personally liable for this amount. And if she cannot pay, then I mean, she can always file for bankruptcy, or it's a different a different process entirely. But in the claim that we're filing, the nurse is personally, we're asking for her liability specifically for $20,000 in punitive damages, and we're asking for $500,000 in punitive damages from the healthcare authority, which should be covered by the insurance. And the other amount that is claimed as compensatory damages, around $2.1 million, is from all the defendants solidarily, except for the nurse, who is only liable for the $20,000 in punitive damages.
Okay, very important details there. I guess as the last question, what about the continued denials of the existence and impact of systemic racism in Quebec? Does the Echaquan family feel they can really heal and move on without this admission from the government?
No, obviously, I think the family is leading a very important battle so that this reality can finally be recognized. Several entities have recognized this reality, including the coroner in her report, as well as some professional orders. It's beyond our understanding why the Legault government does not want to recognize this notion. I think it's for purely political or electoral reasons, but it is a reality of the system, and the family is hoping that through the fight that it has been leading since Joyce's death, we will eventually come to recognize this. And I want to seize this occasion to underscore the great strength and courage that every family member has demonstrated going through all of the steps of this process that has been extremely difficult, as details of Joyce's death have been put on the public space time and time again, both in the coroner's inquest and now with the filing of the lawsuit. They have been very courageous and very strong, and I think they should be a source of inspiration for everyone.
I think anybody with eyes on this situation would agree with you. But in the meantime, Maître Menon, thank you so much for your time and the update on this case. We'll definitely be following it as it plays out.
My pleasure. Thank you.
When we come back, 2 residential schools, 1 island. How Chisasibi is handling their ground searches. Welcome back to Nation to Nation. The Cree community of Chisasibi is the first in Quebec to initiate ground searches at a former residential school site. Or in this case, sites, because the Anglican and Catholic churches both ran residential schools on Fort George Island. Chisasibi appointed George Pachano to the role of Residential School Response Coordinator. He joins us now. George, technical question up front, where is Chisasibi at with the ground search process?
Well, Chisasibi, we did the consultations this past year in November. We had a couple of community meetings. We invited the elders. We invited former residential school students. We also did 3 virtual consultations. And we tried to reach as many people as we can, but you know, it's a vast distance. And Chisasibi is about 1,500 kilometers north of Montreal. So it's a really isolated place, and we don't have the same interaction with other people that we used to have. So we did that. We did the consultations. By June 21st, we made an announcement that Chisasibi was going ahead with the search for unmarked graves and missing children. And shortly after that, I was hired in August just to follow up on the project, just to ensure that it's done. And the consultations, the regular updates are done with the population, former students. And the first thing we had is the GPR team was here in the fall just to do some tests on the location. However, in 1978-79, we moved from Fort George to Chisasibi. So the island has a lot of overgrowth now. We have trees and brush overgrowing the areas where the 2 residential schools were located. So they were doing some ground tests just to look at the location, topographical views, and see how it's going to work, if the GPR was going to work. So they came and they went back, and this is where we're at. They haven't come back. They were supposed to come back and do the report to see how it went, see if it is feasible. And in the meanwhile, I am here. I just started my position, and I have to regularly inform the people what is happening. So this is where we're at.
So it sounds like there's still a lot of details to be worked out, a lot of steps still to come in the process. You know, we talk a lot about the political impacts of the residential school legacy and what politicians can do, but there's obviously a huge personal aspect to this story. So I'm curious, in a community like Chisasibi, you know, it's your home community, what's your connection to the Fort George site?
Well, I was a student at we had 2 residential schools at Fort George. I was on the St. Philip's Residential School, which was run by the Anglican Church. And there was the Roman Catholic residential school, which was run by the Oblate missionaries. So me, I was on the English side, and the French, my wife went to the French side, the Roman Catholic Church. So we're both survivors.
So this is obviously very close to home for you. So I'm curious, how does your experience then as a survivor impact or influence the work that you're doing now in this new role?
Well, as a survivor, I was there 4 years. My wife was there 7 years. So there's a real close connection there because we've been there. We've seen what happened in the residential schools. We heard stories. We've seen some of the events that took place. So it brings it back. It's something. I remember when I left residential school, I said, "This is it. I'm out of here. I go to school. I go work, and that's it. I never want to turn my back." But over the years, it has happened that stuff has resurfaced as people talk. So this is why I really got interested. It was only after the TRC, we went to the one in Montreal in 2014. We went to TRC when they released the report. So it was only after that I was really looking at the file, the effects of the residential school and the stories that came out, and how do we get the truth out. So that is my connection.
Now, even in these early stages, do you feel like there will be remains found at the site?
I don't have first-hand information, but there's people that have mentioned that something did happen. I am certain we'll find remains. I don't know where. There are certain places we were instructed to check. And that's all I have right now. So my job now is in preparation for the GPR that we'll be doing in 2023. My job is to verify certain stories. I have to talk to the residential school survivors that are still alive. As you know, most of them are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. So that is my job at the present moment.
And it's an important one, too. And Chisasibi obviously is leading the charge for Quebec in terms of ground searches at former residential school sites. So I'm curious, what have you learned so far through this process that might actually help other communities across Canada that haven't begun the search process?
To verify the stories. I am sure there's a basis for certain stories. So I think the main thing is talking to the residential school survivors, trying to verify the stories and pinpoint locations. I know the location where we were at, it's a big area, so we can't search the whole area, so we have to be specific where we look. So I think those are the two main obstructions that we have. Plus, it's been 30 years, 40 years since they closed the schools, so there's overgrowth, and the two schools we had, they were torn down, so that makes it twice as hard.
Definitely. So definitely a lot of details to unfold still moving forward, and it's a story that we will follow. But in the meantime, George, thank you so much for the update. Much appreciated.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
And on that note, we bring the season premiere of Nation to Nation to a close. If you missed any part of tonight's show, it's available on our website, or you can check out our podcast at aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Richardson. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.